Every national team has had a manager who became a complete disaster. But even worse is when that national team is one that had already won the World Cup.
It's another from Tanaka! I can barely believe this!
So in this video, we're gonna see the worst manager in the 21st century of every World Cup winning country. Starting with England, who after the 2006 World Cup hired a coach called Steve McClaren, who wouldn't last long before getting sacked. He had just taken Middlesbrough to the Europa League final, so he looked like the perfect choice. And his goal as England's manager was clear: qualify for the Euros 2008. But in his very first squad call-up, he made a shocking decision to not call David Beckham. That made a lot of people angry. Even so, things started well, 5-0 and 1-0 wins. But in the next match, England drew. For the first time, the fans started booing McClaren. But he had no idea that the worst was still to come. The next opponent was Croatia away, but England wasted chance after chance and Croatia scored. And just as England was desperate for an equalizer,
Oh my goodness! Oh.
2-0. Now there was no room for mistakes anymore. But in the next match against Israel, it ended in a draw. BBC called it a lifeless performance. Many fans already wanted him sacked. Not even a 3-0 win changed the mood. At that point, McClaren realized something. His plan wasn't working. So he called David Beckham back and England regained their confidence, winning 4 consecutive qualifying matches. Now the situation was simple. To qualify for the Euros, they just needed 1 point against Russia or Croatia. It looked easy. But against Russia, McClaren made several wrong decisions and they lost by 2-1. And when they went to Wembley to face Croatia, England lost by 3-2. With a defeat at home, they failed to qualify for the Euros. To make things worse, McClaren also lost friendlies along the way. His final record? Just 1.79 points per game. We're gonna evaluate each manager based on that. But will McClaren finish as the worst manager? Let's find out. Next up, Spain. After they were eliminated from the 2018 World Cup, Spain announced their new manager, Luis Enrique, a Champions League winning coach who was gonna lead them in the UEFA Euro, the 2021 Nations League, and the 2022 World Cup. They had no idea he would end up as the worst manager. His philosophy was total ball possession, sometimes nearly 1,000 passes per game. And sometimes it worked. They beat Germany 6-0. But against defensive teams, Spain looked completely stuck. So much so that at the Euros 2021, Spain drew 0-0 against Sweden and 1-1 against Poland, even with 75% ball possession. And in the knockout stage, it was a roller coaster. Spain beat Croatia 5-3, then drew against Switzerland, advancing on penalties, and in the semi-final, another draw against Italy. So once again, penalties. But this time, Spain was eliminated. However, Luis Enrique still had another chance to win something. A couple of months later, they defeated Italy to go to the Nations League final against France. So he went with that same strategy of ball possession. But in the end, Benzema and Mbappe destroyed the dream. Now his last chance to give Spain a title was gonna be in the 2022 World Cup. And it started in a perfect way, 7-0 against Costa Rica. But in the next match against Germany, Spain had 64% possession, but only 3 shots on target. Final score 1-1. Still, Luis Enrique refused to change his style. Then came the match against Japan, where Spain had even more ball possession, 82%. But they simply couldn't break through the defense, and Spain even conceded twice. Final score 2-1 for Japan. Still, Spain advanced to the round of 16 to face Morocco. But it was the same thing. Lots of ball possession, but just 1 shot on target. So the match ended 0-0, it went to penalties, and Spain was eliminated. With that, Luis Enrique left the national team for good. Counting every match, he finished with 23 wins and 7 defeats, but 14 draws, having an average of 1.89 points per game. Not that bad, but still ends up as Spain's worst manager. And to be fair, we're considering managers who coached at least 5 matches for the national team. We'll be going through each world champion one by one, so now let's move on to France. And their worst coach almost won the World Cup, but ended up with one of the most embarrassing eliminations ever. In 2004, a man called Raymond Domenech became France's new manager, and his first task was simple: qualify for the 2006 World Cup. And he not only did it, but led France all the way to the final, only losing on penalties. He looked like the perfect man for the job. So the French Federation kept him for the next two major tournaments that were gonna come up, the UEFA Euro 2008 and the World Cup 2010. Then in the Euros, France were drawn into the group of death. But there was a problem. That was their first tournament without Zidane, who had retired. And without him, they were a complete disaster. 0-0 draw, 2-0 loss, and a 4-1 loss against the Netherlands. France was eliminated, finishing bottom of the group. That alone should have been enough to sack Domenech, but they kept him in the job. He was relieved for getting a second chance. So fast forward 2 years, the World Cup arrived. But in the opening match against Uruguay, they could only manage a draw. And the problems weren't just on the pitch. In the next game against Mexico, Anelka insulted the coach at halftime, and as a result, the striker was expelled from the squad. To make things worse, in the second half, Mexico scored twice, making it 2-0. But the chaos kept growing. Domenech had completely lost control and players even boycotted the training session because of what happened to Anelka. So by the time France reached their last game against South Africa, the team was already broken. So from a corner...
Noise and the header's in! South Africa lead!
To make matters worse, a French midfielder elbowed an opponent in the face and was sent off. So down to 10 men, France conceded yet another one, and in the end only managed a late consolation goal. With the defeat by South Africa, France was eliminated in the group stage. Even at the very end, after the final whistle, Domenech even refused to shake hands with South Africa's coach. So he was sacked, ending as the worst France manager of the 21st century, an average of 1.86 points per match. But the managers we've seen are actually good compared to the ones we'll still see in this video. Now after France, let's go to the two-time champions Uruguay. In 2002, Uruguay were reaching the World Cup for the first time in 12 years, coached by a guy named Victor Púa. But their qualification had already been a struggle. They only reached the tournament through the Intercontinental playoffs. And the year before, things hadn't looked great either. At the Copa America, Uruguay finished 4th after losing to Honduras on penalties. They needed to turn things around, and their first World Cup match was against Denmark. But they conceded the first goal, then equalized, and just when it was finishing with a draw, Denmark scored again, 2-1. Now the next game was against France. On paper, France had a much stronger squad, but then Henry was sent off. Suddenly Uruguay had a man advantage. But even with one extra player, Victor Púa's team barely created any real chances. Final score 0-0. Now they went into the last game needing to beat Senegal by a good margin. But right from the start, but it was far from over. Senegal scored the second and the third, going into halftime at 3-0. Until in the second half, Uruguay woke up and they scored back all 3 goals. But it still wasn't enough. Uruguay finished with another draw and was eliminated, having one of their worst World Cup campaigns ever. So the manager left the job, finishing with 9 wins, 8 draws and 8 defeats, an average of just 1.4 points per game, which means he's now in last place. But not for long. Now climbing up the number of titles, we arrive at Argentina. Right after losing the 2016 Copa America final, the federation hired a new manager, Edgardo Bauza. The problem is that Argentina were emotionally devastated. They lost the 2014 World Cup final, the 2015 Copa America final, and the 2016 Copa America final. Because of that, Messi had announced he was retiring from the national team. So Bauza arrived to a team that was completely shaken, and his first mission was to convince Messi to come back. So he traveled to Barcelona and somehow he managed to change Messi's mind. So the number 10 returned, where in Bauza's very first match, he scored the winning goal against Uruguay. After that, Edgardo decided that the best tactic was to depend 100% on Messi. But the problem was that for the next games, Messi was injured. So it was a disaster. Without Messi, they drew with Venezuela, drew with Peru, and then they lost to Paraguay at home. Bauza's team had no plan B. Without Messi, Argentina was just a weak team. Then finally, Messi returned. But the next opponent was Brazil, who were in incredible form and Argentina lost 3-0. At that point, Bauza was about to lose his job. Then came a brief moment of hope. Against Colombia, Messi had 3 goal contributions and against Chile, he scored the winning goal. But during that game, Messi insulted the linesman, so FIFA punished him with a 4-game suspension. That meant Argentina had to play the next match against Bolivia without him again, and it was another disaster, a 2-0 loss. After just 8 matches, Edgardo Bauza was sacked, finishing with 3 wins, 2 draws and 3 losses, an average of just 1.38 points per game, the worst so far. But spoiler, there will be someone worse than that. Now let's go to Italy, the 4-time champions that won their last title under the manager Lippi. And after winning the World Cup, he left the national team. That should have been the end. But the problem wasn't his first spell with Italy, but rather his second one. Cause in 2008, the Italian Federation decided to bring him back. But instead of rebuilding the squad with a new generation, he trusted the same 2006 players, now older and slower. And the warning signs came early, like a 1-1 draw against Ireland. But the real test would come in 2009 at the Confederations Cup, which is a mini World Cup with a group stage, semi-finals and final. So Italy started well, beating the United States 3-1. But in the next match against Egypt, they couldn't get past the Egyptian keeper, until from a corner, Italy conceded a goal. Final score, Egypt 1, Italy 0. But now the last match was against Brazil, and it was a humiliation, 3-0. However, Lippi still refused to change. So he went to the 2010 World Cup with that same idea, even making 37-year-old Fabio Cannavaro his captain, a guy who was already on his way to retire. At least Italy's group looked easy, Paraguay, New Zealand and Slovakia. But when they went for the first game against Paraguay,
A good side of this, now they retreat. And the header's in! Paraguay in front!
Paraguay scored right over Cannavaro. Italy managed to equalize later, but after that they created nothing else. Final score 1-1. Next game, New Zealand, ranked 78th in the world. It looked like a guaranteed win, but then
Curls it in. Oh, and a touch in! New Zealand, remarkably!
Cannavaro made another mistake. For many, the blame was on Lippi for calling him up. Italy had a better squad on paper, but they just couldn't create clear chances, and only managed to score from a penalty. Final score 1-1. Now they arrived at the final game against Slovakia under giant pressure, win or be eliminated. However,
which made it easy for Kylian to bring it away, but then has given it away, and it's rolled in, and a chance! Would you believe it, Robert Vitek?
then Slovakia kept playing better than Italy, until in the second half they scored another one. Hope came with a goal from Di Natale, but instead of the equalizer, Slovakia scored one more. So when Quagliarella pulled one back, it was already too late. Final score, Slovakia 3, Italy 2, and the Italians finished at the bottom of the group. Just like that, Marcello Lippi's second spell came to an end, with a record of 11 wins, 11 draws, 5 losses, and an average of just 1.63 points per game. Now we arrive at the worst manager of the 21st century for another world champion, Germany. Germany has a history of keeping managers for a long time, but now when that manager is Hansi Flick. After 15 years under Joachim Löw, Germany needed renewal. So in 2021, they turned to him. Flick was gonna have 3 challenges ahead: the World Cup qualifiers, the Nations League, and the World Cup itself. And he seemed like the perfect guy for the job. He had just won everything with Bayern, including the Champions League. And in his first qualifier games, Germany won 7 matches in a row. Flick seemed to have found the formula: high possession, high defensive line, and everyone attacking. But then came the Nations League. In the group with Italy, England, and Hungary, Germany was the favorite. But it started with a draw against Italy and a draw against England. The fans were already unsatisfied, but then they also drew with Hungary. At least they bounced back by beating Italy. But just when it seemed everything was under control, in the next game against Hungary, they lost. But things were about to get worse. 2 months later, it came the 2022 World Cup. The group was Spain, Japan, and Costa Rica. So the mission was simple: beat the weaker teams and fight Spain for the first place. And against Japan, it started as expected, with Germany dominating until they scored the opener. But there was a problem: they couldn't score another one. And even while winning, Flick refused to change. The high line stayed. Then it happened. Japan attacked, Neuer spilled the ball, and Japan equalized. Now Germany panicked. They pushed forward with an even higher line. Exactly what Japan wanted: a long ball over the top, control, shot, and goal. Japan 2, Germany 1. Now the pressure was massive. Germany had to win against Spain, but they drew. So everything came down to the final match. Germany had to beat Costa Rica and hope that Spain would defeat Japan. Only then they would finish in second place. So Germany did their job. But Japan beat Spain. Final standings, Japan first, Spain second, and Germany was eliminated. Even so, the German Federation decided to keep him in the job. After all, Germany had never fired a manager before. But they would soon regret it. After the World Cup, the next games were friendlies to prepare for the Euros 2024. So in the first match, a win over Peru. But that would be Flick's last win. After that, lost to Belgium, draw with Ukraine, lost to Poland, and lost to Colombia. But if that was bad, at home against Japan came a 4-1 defeat. That was the final straw, so Hansi Flick was finally sacked. In total, he had 12 wins, but 7 of those came in the World Cup qualifiers in a weak group. He also had 7 draws and 6 losses, ending with an average of 1.72 points per game. Edgardo from Argentina has been the worst coach so far, but that's about to change. Let's go to the national team with the most World Cups, Brazil, who had a coach named Dorival sacked after losing 4-1 to Argentina. But he's great compared to the coach that led Brazil years earlier. In March 2001, Brazil went to play a friendly against the United States with our new coach called Emerson Leão. He arrived to put Brazil back on track after the national team had some crisis. And in his first game, it was a win. What he didn't know was that would be one of the only wins he would ever get. Next match, Mexico, where they drew 3-3. Not a terrible of a start. But then the World Cup qualifiers came. In the very next match, Brazil lost to Ecuador for the first time ever. Then things got worse. They drew at home with Peru. Everyone saw Emerson Leão wasn't doing a great job. But suddenly there was another tournament ahead, the 2001 Confederations Cup. And that's when he became controversial. When he made the squad call-up, Leão focused on players from the Brazilian domestic league, which meant no Rivaldo, no Ronaldinho, and Ronaldo was injured. To make things even worse, he named as captain a player called Leomar from a completely average Brazilian club. It was shocking, but somehow, the first game Brazil beat Cameroon 2-0. Maybe his plan would work, but that hope didn't last. Next match, draw against Canada, then a draw against Japan. Brazil was clearly below its level. Even so, they advanced to the knockout stage, starting directly in the semi-final against France. But in that game, everyone saw the gap of quality. France dominated and defeated Brazil 2-1, and Brazil's only goal came from a free kick. But the humiliation wasn't over. There was still the third place playoff against Australia. Australia was much weaker, but on the pitch, Brazil looked completely lost. No creativity, no ideas. Until late in the game.
That's a good ball! Australia have scored!
After that, Brazil showed no reaction. Final score 1-0 Australia. One of the biggest humiliations in Brazil's history. So right at Japan's airport, Emerson Leão was sacked. They didn't even wait for him to get back to Brazil. So he finished his disastrous spell with 2 wins, 4 draws, 3 losses, and an average of 1.1 points per game. That's crazy. But what did you think of this video? If you enjoyed it, I think you're gonna like this one too. Thanks for watching and bye.